Well, as the Conservative Party conference gets underway, many would say the chasm between climate change activists and the government couldn't be wider. This summer's Greenpeace rooftop protest at Rishi Sunak's house in North Yorkshire prompted a debate about whether it's ever justified to break the law to highlight a cause, even if that cause is trying to save the planet. So, we brought together two people with very different viewpoints. Sue Pascoe, who's the Deputy Chairwoman of the Conservative Women's Organisation in Yorkshire, and James Skeet. He grew up in Rishi Sunak's constituency and now he's a spokesman for Just Stop Oil. He's been arrested 13 times and was recently remanded in prison after occupying an oil terminal.
The government has given the green light for the development of what will be the UK's largest untapped oil and gas field in the North Sea. Now, the site at Rosebank, west of the Shetland Isles, will produce 300 million barrels of oil during its lifetime, with the companies involved saying it will boost the UK economy.
So this week we had the go-ahead for a new oil field in the North Sea, and of course back in the summer we had that protest on Rishi Sunak's roof in his constituency in North Yorkshire. Sue Pascoe, how did you feel about that?
I was disappointed because it was a violation of Rishi's personal space, his home, and I think that's unacceptable, and I don't think it achieves anything. And if we have a look at what happened to Greenpeace, they've gone from being at the table in various government departments, now not being at the table. So I think that they have failed in their mission and they've had an hour of fame. So I think it has failed, and I think it's really quite disgusting what they did.
James Skeet, is breaking the law justified in pursuit of your aims?
Well, I do think that the framing of this discussion is unfortunately wrong, I would say. I think that what this government has done today in licensing Rosebank is an act of criminal vandalism, the likes of which none of us have probably seen before in our lifetimes. It's an act of treason against the British people and an act of war against the young and the most vulnerable on this planet. And they really need to be held to account.
So you believe it is acceptable to break the law?
I believe that sometimes the law is wrong and sometimes it's necessary to break the law in order to tackle greater things that are more damaging to our communities.
I think our democracy is built on us all as citizens participating under the rule of law. And we have a democracy that's built on people participating in the political process. And if you want to influence, you should stand for election. Breaking the law is something that I don't countenance in any circumstance.
The fact is that we're in a situation where I think that the British people are recognising that politics has failed us. They can see that the politicians do not work for us. They can see the corruption. They can see the lies. They can see the fact that Rishi Sunak, is in bed with the fossil fuel lobby, right? The Tory party took £3.5 million from high-polluting industries and the fossil fuel lobby in 2022 alone. We are seeing the entire planet on fire. Canada's on fire. Millions of New Yorkers can't leave their homes because of the blood orange skies in New York this last year. We've seen Southern Europe on fire. We're seeing crop failure worldwide. When we're sort of led by, people who are brazenly breaking the law, and this is the fundamental thing, Sue, is that our leaders are breaking the law. They signed into law that they would do something about the climate crisis, and they are not doing it. They are doing the exact opposite.
I think you're in danger here of defaming people. And I think it is not right to the conspiracy theory.
This is an objective fact. It's not a conspiracy theory that we have a political class that is so deranged that they're licensing over 100 new fossil fuel projects against the advice of the entire scientific community, and that's why we need to get on the streets.
You are so arrogant. It is unbelievable. The reduction in our CO2 emissions is the biggest in the G7. It is huge. We need to meet our net zero targets. That is really important. It's set in law, and we need a pragmatic way of doing that that brings the whole of our country along with us.
Do you support Rishi Sunak's U-turn, as some would say, on net zero policies?
So I don't really think they had much choice. I also don't think we were ready with the infrastructure to support the mass movement into electric vehicles by 2030. So I think to 2035 is a practical measure to take all of our society along with us, and we can move forward in a pragmatic manner.
Just to be clear, you're saying ignore the views of the British people at the ballot box. Revolution is the solution.
No. The British people voted for action on the climate in 2019. They voted for a party that stated that they were going to take action on the climate, and they're going back on their promises.
You've disagreed on quite a bit today. Do you think there is some common ground? Are there things you can agree on?
I think this is the fundamental thing. I think that there's more that unifies us than separates us. Because I agree with 99% of what you've said, Sue. I'm in total agreement with you. But the problem is that objectively, this government isn't doing what's best for the British people. And I'm sorry, Sue, that you have to be on here and justify the last 13 years of criminal incompetence from this government.
Do you agree with anything you've heard today?
I agree that our planet is our home, that climate is really important, and that we all have a personal responsibility to do our bit, and that our government has a responsibility to do its bit, and I think it is doing.
We have had a heated debate. It's been very interesting. Thank you, Sue Pascoe and James Skeet. Well, what do you make of that then? In a moment, we'll hear from Will McCallum from Greenpeace. But first, if I can come to you, Robbie Moore. Now, I don't expect you in a million years to agree with Just Stop Oil, but what do you make of that point that conventional politics has so far failed to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, I don't agree with that point either, I'm afraid, Tim. The reality of it is, when the government took power in 2010, we had 40% of our energy security was reliant on coming from coal. We're now at 1.5% as of last year. We are the fastest country in the G7, which has reduced our reliance on fossil fuels and our emissions that are going out. So we are taking action. And I think when you have got people on different ends of the spectrum, so to speak, with wanting to achieve net zero quicker, and those that are still minded that climate change doesn't exist. You need a government that is wanting to achieve the end goal, which the government absolutely is committed to achieve net zero by 2050, but doing that in a mechanism and through a way in which is bringing the country with you. And I think the Prime Minister's announcements over the last week or so is pragmatic, it's realistic, and takes a common sense approach in achieving net zero by 2050.
Let me bring in Will McCallum from Greenpeace now. Now, what do you make of the point that was made there by Sue Pascoe in our debate, that actually that protest on Rishi Sunak's roof was a huge mistake by you, because it cost you your seat at the table when it comes to having your say on government policy, and ultimately it lost you credibility, didn't it?
Throughout the last months, we've continued writing to ministers, we've spoken to a number of politicians, we continue to submit evidence to consultations, and of course our hundreds of thousands of members are writing to their MPs as well, making it known that we need to see climate action now. Since our action at the Prime Minister's house, we've also seen him U-turn on a number of absolutely crucial green policies. And it's not just Greenpeace that's calling him out for that. We've seen absolute anger from a number of car companies who invested billions in trying to achieve the 2030 target, only to see their hard work, their investment, not being completely taken for granted by the Prime Minister.
But when people see protesters blocking roads, disrupting sporting events, stopping people getting to school and going to hospital appointments, that sets back your cause, doesn't it?
When people see floods on the streets, when people see heat waves, when people see fires, that disrupts the government's current agenda. We absolutely need a government that is taking climate action seriously. Throughout history, we see that protest does bring about change, whether it's the women's vote, whether it's the anti-slavery movement, whether it's civil rights, whether it's independence movements across the world. Peaceful protest has its place in a healthy democracy. Greenpeace has been around for over half a century and will continue to exist for many more years. We have always taken peaceful action.
Emma Hardy, do you believe it's ever justified to break the law in pursuit of your political aims?
Well, I obviously support the right for peaceful protest. I've been involved in protesting myself, and there's coming to you from the City of Hull, of course, I have to mention the headscarf revolutionaries, who are 4 working class women who took peaceful protest to the streets, took it down to Downing Street and made the government listen at a time when women weren't even involved in politics. But I support peaceful protest within the confines of the law. But I do want to also make the point, this was why the Labour Party voted against the Public Order Act, because the law needs to fully allow the right for peaceful protests and for the right for people to express their opinions. And our concerns with the Public Order Act and the way that it was written in such a vague way that we could have a situation where a member of my staff working for me in Parliament walks down the street in Parliament Square with a bike lock and can be arrested by the police because he's carrying a bike lock into my office. So we have to address the right for peaceful protest. But of course, if people feel passionately about it, it's a democracy that we live in. We live in a democracy. Protest is part of that democracy. But I would say, I personally would never, ever support targeting somebody's home. I mean, the Prime Minister lives there with his wife and children. I don't think you should be attacking the Prime Minister's home. But, take the protest to Parliament Square, march around London, do other ways of protesting, but I would always say, no, please don't go for people's homes. That's a very personal and private space.
Well, Rishi Sunak's been doing the rounds the past few days. You may have seen him all over the telly. And one of the interviews he did was with our very own James Vincent. Now, James asked him about the government's climate policies and why that they are perhaps switching some of their transport policies towards the car.
Most people are getting around in their cars. It's important that when they do that, the roads are well maintained. And actually, we should be investing more in road maintenance and potholes. So look, these are all, I know there's a lot of focus on HS2, but actually the day-to-day journeys in your car, taking buses, there is an enormous amount that we're investing to connect up the northern towns and cities, and actually Manchester to Leeds is a big part of that, making sure that Bradford, for example, also is connected at, I think, 12 minutes from memory, and 4 trains an hour from memory into Leeds. There's things like that we're doing, making sure Leeds is treated like London.
Robbie Moore, what do you reckon? Do you think the people you represent would feel they're being treated like London when it comes to transport spending?
Well, the good thing from the buses, for example, we've seen the rollout of a £1 bus ticket charge in Keighley, so everyone can get around within Keighley, and we've seen £2 for a single ticket, and that's all been as a result of the government giving that money to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority so that we can have that rolled out at a local level. But when you are looking at the likes of Bradford, I've been very vocal and wanting to see Northern Powerhouse Rail delivered in full, getting that east-west connectivity from Hull right across to Liverpool with a proper stop in Bradford. And that is exactly what I would like to see. And I very much hope it will be, because if we're serious about driving economic growth to the Bradford district and beyond, businesses need that certainty, my constituents need that certainty.
Will McCallum, many people in our part of the world watching this today rely on their cars. Public transport just isn't an option for them. I mean, do you accept there will be a large section of the electorate when politicians come up to them and say, we're going to tax you more, or using a car or driving is going to cost you more ultimately, why they wouldn't get their vote?
Well, I think we actually see huge support for the transition to electric vehicles. More than 90% of those who've already purchased electric vehicles have said under no circumstances would they ever return to petrol and diesel cars. So I don't think the environmental agenda is targeting motorists in the slightest. What I think we're seeing is a failure of government to properly invest in public transport that would make it easier for some people who would prefer to be using their car less, or who can't use a car for whatever reason, to actually be able to get from A to B much, much cheaper. So it's great to hear Robbie supporting those additional rail investments. That's absolutely something Greenpeace can get behind.
Emma Hardy, how many people in your constituency can afford a brand new electric car?
Well, they can't afford a brand new car, full stop, Tim. I mean, this is the joke about it. When we were listening to the VT just before, and they were saying, you know, we're going to ban petrol cars by 2030, they seem to forget most people don't buy new cars, most people buy second-hand cars. So even if you had the ban on petrol cars by 2030, the second-hand market will still be going strong for a very long time. And in fact, I didn't get a brand new car until I became a Member of Parliament. Before that, I always had second-hand cars. So I think the government's weakness here, and the Prime Minister is being weak with this, he's U-turning on the whim of a certain part of his party telling him what to do, and he's caved in again instead of standing up for what's right. So keep the 2030 ban on petrol cars, recognising that actually that still means there's going to be a robust and, you know, buoyant second-hand car market going on for a very long time, because not everyone has as much money as the Prime Minister and can get a new car. But it also shows the direction of travel. And I think this is where the other thing I care a lot about, and that's good quality jobs where people can gain skilled employment. The car industry itself needs that certainty, so they're looking to say, OK, if we're making decisions to invest in the UK, if we're making decisions to invest in electric vehicle infrastructure or electric vehicle manufacture, then we need to know what the government's planning. And what this weakness from the Prime Minister has shown is that business isn't going to have that certainty. And if they don't have certainty, then in a global market, they're simply not going to choose to invest in our country. So he's letting down environmentalists and workers.
Well, I think I don't see this as a weakness by the Prime Minister at all. This is the Prime Minister take a pragmatic, realistic and common sense approach that is enabling those that want to transition more time to do that. Because what we, you know, as for the net zero agenda, we contribute 1% in terms of global emissions. China is 30%. That's combined more than the EU, India and the United States. So we have to take a pragmatic approach, which is not hampering hard-working families and forcing them to put new boilers in their homes. So with the change has been that people can change their boilers now when they wish, and having that extra 5 years actually helps families make that transition. So this isn't a sign of weakness. This is a sign of the Prime Minister being pragmatic and realistic about the situation that we're in, because we have made good traction so far in reaching our net zero targets by 2050.
I just want to give the last word to Will McCallum from Greenpeace on this one. I mean, we talked earlier on about direct action and whether it works. I mean, would you do the same again? Would you send protesters onto Rishi Sunak's roof?
We have no plans to go back to the Prime Minister's house anytime soon. But what I would say, just to Robbie's last point, is to me a pragmatic approach would not be licensing a huge new oil field in the North Sea at huge cost to the UK taxpayer, allowing a Norwegian company to take all of the profits out of this country. That new North Sea oil is not going to be able to be used by the British public. It's going to go onto the global market. So when we look at a pragmatic response to the climate challenge, we don't see this government taking pragmatic action right now. We see them opening up, trying to max out North Sea oil and gas at a time where we desperately need to see a much more realistic approach to the climate challenge, which is phasing out fossil fuels slowly.
And of course, energy security, energy independence is incredibly important. The war in Ukraine has highlighted that. We've all seen our utility bills go up. And that has mean, and the Rosebank issuing of the licence was a step in the right direction. It provides energy security throughout the transition period before we get to renewables and relying on nuclear.
28 years for that oil field to start releasing oil into the market. And even then it will go onto the global market. It will not come into the UK. And all this while, the cost is falling on the UK taxpayer. It was an absolutely disastrous move, not just for the climate, but also for the economy.
We are going to have to come back to this debate another time. I know many people will be having their say using our hashtag BBCPN, but at this point we will thank Will McCallum for joining us today.